doing.
Like, how do you beat a guy that just two-shots you when there's no blocking, dodging, or iframes? I don't get it. I just don't get it, man. Like, did I just one-shot this boss? Easy. Not even a challenge, bro. Just one-shot him. Who cares? We're here. We're back. Nioh 3. I'm super excited about this game. It's a series that I've always really enjoyed playing, and I have so many things to talk about with this game. We've just completed every single achievement in the game. I am now 100% done. I beat New Game Plus. The final boss is done, and I have had an absolute experience here. Let's go straight into it without wasting any of your time. First of all, this is a type of game where it really wants to filter you out. If you tried out the demo and decided, 10 hours in, I'm done. I'm not really, this isn't for me. Well, I'm not going to blame you. Oh no! One shot me, dude! What was that? But you didn't actually reach the true game potential yet. So this is kind of the formula for Nioh 3 is they really do tend to have a lot of upfront difficulty and challenge because they understand that their games hide a lot of complexity within their systems, and that really does turn into what ends up being a very rewarding experience once you end up learning everything. The other part about this game is that I feel that most people coming into it are going to expect, at least from what they see, a Souls like experience. And with many Souls like games, that might vary, of course, but this is not necessarily a traditional Souls like game. In fact, I wouldn't even call it that. I would say this Neo series is more akin to an ARPG, such as like your Diablo, or even more like a Borderlands, like a looter shooter. And with that, you more or less have a Souls like and an action combat coding or foundation to add to that ARPG loot experience. So that's the way I would look at this game. And if you're going to compare it to that, you have to think about the framework that those games use, which is you start off incredibly weak and you have that scaling power fantasy, which is so rewarding in those type of games. And this game does that so very well, in which you become more powerful as you level. You get new skills, you get your build together, you get set items and bonuses on your gear, and everything really starts to come together. This is where things become very enjoyable. Yeah, so right off the rip, as soon as you get out of the tutorial, things are a little bit different than what I would have initially expected. I didn't realize they were going to make this into somewhat of an open world type of game, although I wouldn't exactly call it that. It's not like they just directly took Elden Ring success and said, "Now we need an open world with a horse to run around on." And if they did that, I probably wouldn't enjoy it that much. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of those, but I do like what they've done here. It's kind of like a more condensed open area style format where no matter where you look, there's going to be enemies you can fight and things to do, little enemy camps to liberate where you kill a certain number of enemies to complete and get some loot. And then there's also these little crucibles that you can defeat, and that's pretty cool. You get a lot of things from that, and you'll find skill points hidden around in different zones. And the more you explore, the more it'll actually just show you on the map where things that you may have missed are. So you never really are going to end up in a situation where you're just completely weaker than you would have been because you didn't know where something was and you have to go look up a guide. They do a pretty good job of just uncovering the map eventually for you. So that's nice. With it being open area like this, you have two options. You can go straight to the main quest, try to complete the game as fast as possible if you feel like that is the type of person that you want to be, the type of player that you are. For me, I spent a lot of time in the demo just exploring and checking things out and trying out some of the different side areas, such as this one new concept they added in called the Bloodedge Demon. Now, in all the Nioh games, anytime a person dies, they leave behind this little red sword in the ground, and you can summon their revenant and fight basically the NPC version of the player that died and then get some of their loot. It's just a fun little thing that happens, and it's a great way to farm loot, honestly. But in this game, they added something where if a lot of people are dying, there's this new NPC side enemy called the Bloodedge Demon, and it's like this really tough boss. At least it really was early game. And it really made me appreciate using some of the ninja tools that they add in the game, where you can throw all of these ranged ninjutsu and bombs and different things like that. Now, while the formula for many of these Neo games is that it is always very difficult, at least initially for this first playthrough, they do tend to give you a lot of tools to adjust that difficulty without a specific difficulty slider. In this game, that difficulty slider is, are you using ninja skills? Because if you are using ninja skills and ninja mode early game, that's going to be your easy mode. But if you're trying to use all your samurai stuff, that's the hard mode. And it's funny because that does in fact change and almost completely 180 later in the game once you start to pick up gear and scaling and have other mechanics add on top of each other and other scaling systems. And I could talk about that towards the end when I talk about my in-game setup. But it is kind of a funny thing how that does work. And you're probably used to this sort of thing happening in other ARPGs as well, where, something that works really well in the early game, it flip-flops, and, when scaling kicks in, it's the other way around. And I really like that. It actually adds a lot of flavor for me when playing the game. So when I was playing this, I tried out a lot of axe attacks and, different samurai weapons early on, and it was a little bit challenging for me. But as I got towards the demo boss, I was so used to using those ninja abilities, I just completely demolished it on my first try. On the other hand, I had a buddy that wanted to catch up and play co-op. He actually rushed straight to the demo boss, and he didn't even really play around with the systems in the game, and didn't even realize you had to train your perfect dodge. It's actually a skill in the skill tree. You don't start the game with this. And he was having a very rough time in the game until I looked at his Discord recording that he was showing me, and I said, "Dude, you got to take some of these skills." And then things got a lot easier from there. So it is kind of funny how the game gives you the tools to make your life much easier, but if you don't engage with those systems, you're going to have a rough time. And that's one of the things which, in my opinion, makes this game so much more fun. And I really do miss this about games in general. I feel like there's a lot of maybe like AAA games out there that they just really hold your hand way too much. And it takes away from the joy of discovery and the rewarding feeling of actually learning something and having that sense of accomplishment. Anyway, to recap on the difficulty of the game, Nioh does not lower the difficulty, it hands you leverage and tools to do so yourself. And it rewards those who actually take the time to learn its systems. Now, I actually want to speak about the use of those tools. Nioh 3 does a really good job of removing the friction from experimentation and actually gives you an encouragement to experiment with the systems within the game, as opposition to what you might be used to in many Western games, where when you make a decision on a stat or a weapon or a skill tree that you're going to play, and you feel locked in and no longer able to experiment on any other ideas, this game removes all friction from the respec. You can, at any point in time, you go stand at a shrine, remove all of the skill points with no cost, and redo all of your skills. You can redo all of your stat points. And in fact, you can even save loadouts for your gear sets and for all of your chosen stats so that you can have multiple builds at any given point in time. I feel like it is very I don't know, comforting perhaps to finally have a game that does something that I've always wanted, which is I just want to play the game, man. I don't want to be locked in to somebody else's idea of how I should play the game. Sometimes I don't know what the correct way to play is until I actually have a chance to experiment with those systems. Instead of having the mindset of you need to constantly recreate brand new characters and start from scratch, I now have the opportunity to just use the character that I've created in different ways. And I very much enjoy that personally. This is very contrast to Western style development that I feel like I've seen in many Western ARPGs. As an Asian game, I think that they take a different design philosophy. And this also shows up with the design of the inventory system. Since this is a very heavily loot based game where you're going to get that dopamine hit from constantly seeing explosions of loot fly out, well, one of the things that starts to remove my excitement for loot in many games is when I have to deal with inventory management. I hate inventory management. I'm just going to tell you something about myself. Anytime I play a game that I have the ability to remove an inventory from the game, I will do so. I remember playing a playthrough of Fallout 4, and I immediately downloaded a mod that completely removed all of the inventory weight management so I can pick up everything in the game. I do this in every single game that forces me to deal with inventory. I will remove the inventory. And this game gives you a inventory limit of about 2,000 items, and that's a lot, trust me. It wasn't until maybe the third zone that I even had to look at the items. And on top of that, there's a very easy filtering method to rapidly crunch down all of your items for materials, which you can then later craft with. Overall, the design of these type of systems lets you know that Nioh doesn't want to waste your time. It just wants you to have a good time. So I appreciate that as a player that hates inefficiency and hates having to redo things and lose progress. One of the big things that I feel like the Neo series allows itself to differentiate from other more Souls-like entries is that it has a different style of replayability. And what I mean by that is kind of what I was just talking about with it allowing you to experiment with things and not have to constantly restart characters. In other games, you'll probably just do new playthroughs with new, you're going to do a magic playthrough and a melee playthrough, things like that. Well, in Nero, I feel like the replayability comes in that it allows you to redo bosses as much as you would like with this. Well, in this game, it's like a battle scroll type of system where you can choose to replay any mission in the game that you've already done. And also, they add in these extra type of missions where you can kind of go backwards from the end of the mission to the middle of the area, and then you'll fight like different enemies or a different boss. Or sometimes you'll have these challenge mode missions where three of maybe the hardest bosses or the masters of different types of combat all at once fighting you, or back to back fighting you. And it's this really fun challenge to go in and do those. And the other part of it is that it's actually really fun to do in co-op as well if you're into that sort of thing. This is some of the gameplay loop that I enjoy the most of the entire Neo series. It's just going in and redoing some of that fun content and just beating stuff up. Because the best part of Neo for me as a gameplay enjoyer is, well, you guessed it, the gameplay. I just want to go beat stuff up, try out all of the different weapons and the immeasurable amount of weapon skills that are in the game, try out different weapon abilities. I want to try out all the spells. And oh my God, there are so many spells. When you beat an enemy, they have a chance to drop a soul core. And that soul core will provide you with either a summon of that enemy that you beat, and they'll do some cool attack, or they will have a spell which you can cast a couple of different times within combat, and that amounts to a varied level of playstyle depending on how you mix and match things. Now, I'm a little bit curious how many people even get to the end game of Nioh, because interacting with a lot of these systems, it may be rewarding, as I say. However, for I would probably say the entirety of your initial regular playthrough up to the first final boss of the game, you don't really have to mess with anything. You can just pick up whatever is the set that you're currently planning on using. In fact, there's even an auto equip system, so you don't have to think about it. You don't really need to think about your spells or anything. You just put on your favorite weapon and go to town and just kill everything. And that works quite well, honestly. But there are so many things that really open up in New Game Plus. And in every single Neo game, my reason for thinking or my recollection of having so much fun, and well, this game too, even my favorite part of it was playing it again in New Game Plus. They actually unlock an entirely new set of set items. And it's around this point where you start to feel the, I guess, excitement of crafting. You unlock all of the crafting sets, and you can start to adjust the various affixes on your gear to make the perfect build and get things to come together. You have this entire clan system where you choose a clan that gives you one of two different bonuses that can very massively increase your stats. For example, I joined Toto, that basically doubled my HP throughout the entire playthrough. But if you donate enough items to this or build up enough glory from killing revenants, you can then gain a permanent buff. And then when you swap to another clan, you'll still have that. And you can create an entire build centered around combining different clan bonuses. And so there's that system. You've got the magic system. You've got the crafting and affix combinations. You've got your guardian spirits and having the right one to give you the set bonuses that affect your samurai. And then you can, select the correct skill that you want on your weapon, because there's multiple skills that you can use on your weapon and multiple weapons. And there's so many different interconnected mechanics that can feel quite complex and maybe overwhelming for some people. Although you don't even have to really think about a lot of that, like I said, until way, way later into the game. And this is kind of the same thing that happens in most, again, I'm just going back to, this is an ARPG. You don't have to think about this in most ARPGs when you're just playing through the campaign. And I see Nioh 3's, or just the whole Nioh series in general, the first playthrough as kind of like the example of playing through the campaign. And then after that, you kind of just rush through and get to the in-game systems as fast as possible. Now, if you're playing Nioh 3 right now, there's not going to be a huge in-game in the same sense that as if you're going into Nioh 2 or Nioh 1, because where they really open up is when they actually release the DLC, because they're going to release multiple additional New Game Pluses where they have even more bosses and more reasons to farm the better loot and things like that. For now, though, they actually have some pretty cool systems where you can reactivate crucibles that you've already completed and add additional enemies in there. So it's like a harder version of it, and then you'll get more loot because of that. And that's a pretty cool system. So I can see them expanding on that. And I am actually looking forward to seeing what they do add to the game. As a person who enjoys the in-game of Nioh 3, I will say that is probably the downside if you're playing the game right now, as of this moment, is that there's not the full in-game experience that I know will be there after all of the DLC is released. So That's the only downside of this current point in time of Nioh 3. So before I wrap up everything, there were a few complaints that I've always had about this series in general that I feel like they could improve some things on. And, of course, I was glazing a lot about how they encourage the discovery and the playing around with the mechanics and things like that with the game. Unfortunately, there are actually a lot of systems that are very much just not explained at all. And it's really hard to get an answer on them, even if you're Googling the answer. And so, like, for an example, one of the big ones is if you're trying to maximize your damage on enemies, you're you're going to get the biggest amount of damage when you use this system called confusion. And confusion is something that is a debuff added to an enemy when you combine two different elemental debuffs. And the debuffs themselves are actually unexplained anywhere in the game. You don't know what they do. You can't figure out, oh, if I put a lightning debuff, what does that mean? What is a fire debuff? Well, fire debuff's easy. It's damage over time. But the other ones are weird. It's like, okay, what does a wind debuff do? What does this debuff do? What does that debuff? You can't figure it out. It doesn't tell you. And then there are things like, oh, your damage is increased. Okay, but how much? Is it 1% or is it 99%? I don't know. There's a lot of things like that. There are very very annoying, unexplained numbers in the game. Anytime it says, oh, it does a lot of this or a lot of that. This is a complaint I have with a lot of different games, with the UI and a lot of different games. And, while there are some things that are decent and well explained in this game, there are also just as many that are not explained. And did I even tell you what confusion was? No, I didn't, because you wouldn't know unless I told you, which is that it just increases the amount of damage that an enemy takes. So yes, you want to combine multiple elemental debuffs, and they actually added even more to Nioh 3 on top of the other ones, which is that, oh, well, you can actually combine even more to add multiple levels of confusion. And if you get 4 levels of confusion, well, now the boss is slowed even further, and that stacks with other levels of slow. But how would you know that if you didn't look it up? Well, you wouldn't. And that's just a little bit of a complaint that I have. Is that the game is as intuitive as it is in some areas, it is completely unintuitive and inaccessible for just an average person trying to read things and figure it out without having to go to a third party to look it up themselves and things like that. So that is something I would like to see improved is more information about what an actual number is, rather than just saying, "Ugh, it increases your damage. It reduces your damage, blah, 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 things like that. So, well, thank you for sticking around and listening to me. Yep, I appreciate it. For those of you who actually did get filtered out, I'm curious, did that happen? And so for the rest of you, how are you enjoying Nioh 3 so far? I personally am really looking forward to the DLCs that are going to be coming out, because I want to know how the end game is going to shape up. And that's the part that I really enjoy playing, is all of those really hard challenges at like New Game +3. And maybe they'll do like one of those like deep dungeon things they did in Nioh 2. So we'll just have to wait and see. But until then, I'll see you guys around for the next one. Peace, bros.